Well, hello class. I'm back from my family retreat. Family retreat. Boy, I'm tired. Faculty retreat. Sorry. And since there were no assignments for Chapter 2, I thought I would kind of review some of the important points or your takeaways for Chapter 2 because, yes, it was an important chapter, and I think it would probably be prudent for us to go over some of the important things. For one thing, though, when we talk about the global and cultural context of leadership, we're looking at the cultural context of leadership at the national, small group, and organizational levels. There's a lot. There really is a lot in this chapter. But what you have to remember is, going forward, just as a reflection, there are essentially when we define culture, there's four models of national culture. And that is the first one by Hall. Hall's model is he has high and low context. Hofstede goes into 5 dimensions. Trumpeter dimensions, and the global leadership and organizational behavior effectiveness. So those are 4 things that we look at. And when we talk about global leadership, obviously there's a lot of research involved. And the important thing to remember about this is that there is a huge impact of group culture that we're dealing with in terms of gender and diversity. And we look at the causes and solutions to leadership differences based on gender and other small group membership. So the concept of, if you will, developing a cultural mindset is kind of really put forward in this chapter. And the big thing is, like, how do we really get to manage diversity? So when we define culture and its 3 levels and the role that they play in leadership, in your book you may want to look at tables 2-1, figure 2-1, and look at exercises 2-1 and 2-3. You want to look at Hall's model of national culture, and that's figure 2-2. Now I know you're going forward in your book and so forth, but what I'm saying is you can always go back and refer to this video if you want to review this stuff, especially if you want to put some of this stuff in your term papers. If you're talking about, my gosh, if you're talking about different cultures and diversity, look at Hofstede's model, table 2-2 and 2-3 in your book. There's some really good things there. And Trumpeter's figure 2-3, as he looks into national culture and then the global OB, the bigger picture, figure 2-4 and table 2-4. You know, the other thing is look at the impact of gender on leadership and address how leaders can develop a cultural mindset. And look at the steps organizations can take to become more multicultural. And if you look at figure 2-6 of your book, it goes into a lot of that. Okay? So 2 things, the leadership question, and when it comes to the role of culture is, what are the definition and levels of culture? And the second thing is, what are the models of national culture? And the third thing, obviously, is Trumpeter. And the fourth thing is global leadership, which is organizational behavior effectiveness. Okay? So that's kind of, you know, when you're leading change, you got to have a cultural mindset. And I really think that if you look at that and you really got into the chapter, and you may want to look at, in summary and on reflection, if you will, one question is, what are the 4 models of culture and how do they affect leadership? The second thing is, how are the different models of culture similar? and what unique contributions does each model make? Like I said, some of you guys may want to write about this. The third one is, how would the definition of leaders and their effectiveness differ based on their cultural values, their mindset? Look at Hofstede, Schopenhauer, and Global. And finally, okay, how do group memberships impact leaders and leadership? And if you really want to get into it, what are the factors that contribute to the inequality of men and women in the workplace? Especially now, there's been so much talk about that. So that's kind of like a reflection summary of 2, and you can always go back and listen to this video after. And now you're getting ready to go into Chapter 3. Now, Chapter 3 is going to have your, obviously, going to have your next participative discussion. And if you look at Chapter 3, all right, there's a lot of good stuff in it that I really think is going to be very useful to you. All right, so let's take a look at some of the things Chapter 3 has to offer. Okay? Now, go back and look at the overview of Chapter 3. See what it's involving. Understand it. And then go, when you get into the reading, listening, and viewing part, click on those neat hyperlinks in those videos. They are so impactful. Now, let's take a look at why this chapter is probably one of the most important chapters in the book. Okay? And this is what you want to look at. You're going to look at the foundations of modern leadership. What do we mean by modern leadership? Is it comparing to medieval times, or what's it really about? Well, modern leadership, as we look at it today, still has a lot to do with like how we use self-assessment. How do we assess ourselves as leaders? How do we assess others as leaders? And this is really going to be an important part of what you are studying. So take a break for a second right now and reflect upon that. Okay? How do we look at ourselves as leaders, effective leaders? And when you look at the foundations of modern leadership, it really has, in other words, to go forward, you got to go backwards. So the chapter is going to give you an overview of the history of the field of leadership. And what it does is it goes into 3 eras. For us to understand what modern leadership is, we've got to kind of go backward to go forward. So the first thing we're going to look at is leadership eras. That's E-R-A-S, excuse the Boston accent. All right, or traits. All right. What are the 3 eras or traits? Like, where did these people come from that first came up with these leadership concepts? Was it more what we refer to as management today and they called it leadership? Well, we have to compare and contrast to today's leadership to back then. The second thing is that we're going to look at is behavior. How do leaders behave now as compared to how they behaved before? And then finally, okay, we're going to look at what we refer to as contingency. So when we talk about the early theories of leadership, there's a focus on contingency models that constitute the legs that modern leadership stands on. It's the foundation of leadership. So we're going to consider the following models: Fiedler's contingency model, the normative decision model, path goal theory, attributional models, and substitutes for leadership and leader-member exchange. So, what should we look for in this chapter? Well, we start with the eras. Okay, the first era is the trait era, and that goes from the late 1800s to the mid 1940s. Long time, right? And the thing is that when we get into the middle era, which is the behavior, they started looking in this era at culture. They really did. They didn't just say, okay, I tell you what to do and you do it. Now they're saying, how can I create an atmosphere so that you want to do what you're doing, not that somebody's giving you an order to do it. It's kind of the simple way of putting it. And this era went from the early 1940s to the early 1970s. So the trade era goes from the 1800s to the 1940s, right around the time that, just before World War II. And then the mid-1940s, after World War II, to the early 1970s, okay? This is a big era for the baby boomers, all right? They really started thinking of behavior and what type of behavior constituted getting people to do things because they felt good about what they did. It's kind of the beginning of thinking about, Maslow's pyramid, that type of thing. And they did a really good research study at Ohio State. And, you might want to look at that when you're overviewing the chapter. So some of the early theories, like I said, from the early 1960s to the present, were basically based on there's no one best way to lead. The situation and the various relevant contextual factors that are going to help dominate the style of behavior are going to be most effective. And you don't necessarily born a leader. You could be, but people can learn to become good leaders with the right training. And there is a both personal and situational characteristic that affects leadership effectiveness. And when you go into Fiedler, you're going to learn about leader styles. Fiedler came up with something called the Least Preferred Co-worker Scale, LPC. And if you look at Table 3.1 in your book, it talks about LPC. And what LPC is, for example, some people are task motivated, low. Individuals are described as being primarily motivated by getting a task done. You do it. I tell you to do it, you do it. Then there's relationship motivated, and that's a high LPC. Individuals are described as primarily motivated by good interpersonal relationships. And then there is what they refer to as the socio-independent, kind of middle of the road LPC, where individuals are described as generally being unconcerned with what others think. They don't really care. Like, they want to get things done because they have a need to get them done, but they don't care what other people think about them getting it done. It's kind of what they call the middle of the road thing. And then there's something called situational control. That's the leader-member relationship. And what is that relationship between task structure, position power, putting it together, what they call situational control? So then you go into the contingency model. And in the contingency model, there's that presents kind of the leader match concept, which is the training method that is based on contingency. So the focus is on learning to recognize the various elements of what we call situational control and then the leader adapting to the situation, or even the employee adapting to the situation to match the leader's style. So what does Fiedler say? He's interesting. He assumes that leader style is stable and not necessarily changeable. Like, certain leaders lead a certain way, that's the way they are, hands down, and the discussion. However, leadership situations can change randomly or as a result of the leader's actions. So if the leader changes behavior, the employees will change with that behavior. If it's positive, they'll go along with it. If it's negative, they'll resist it. So the question comes up, according to Fiedler, that the leader's efforts should be able to adapt to the situations to fit his or her style. Interesting. Now, then there is what's referred to as the normative decision model, and the normative decision model focuses on decision making, which assumes that leaders can change his or her style and concerned with decision quality as the criterion for effectiveness. So look at Table 3.3 in your book. This section provides a description of the major leader decision styles and substyles used in the normative decision model. So they go from autocratic to consultative to group decision making. So, hey, this is the one you really should like. Path Goal Theory. Look at that. That's a really good model. And I think it's a little bit more than a theory in a lot of ways. Why? The Path Goal Theory of leadership is presented with the focus on the role of the leader to clear paths for subordinates to accomplish their goals. That's what a leader should do. A leader should lead, should help their subordinates get to where they need to go. So the exchange between the leaders and the followers centers around this obstacle removal, and it doesn't focus on problems, more focuses on solutions, and the exchange of guidance or support from the leader for performance and satisfaction from the followers. So there essentially are two hypotheses that we can create on this model. They are as follows. When the task is structured, the leader's supportive behavior is going to lead to follower satisfaction. Whereas when the task is ambiguous, the leader's structuring behavior leads to satisfaction. When it's ambiguous, you're looking for innovation. You're looking for creativity from your members. You're looking for creativity from your team. So that's really important as well. If you want to lead change, you really need to be able to have two things: innovation and practicality in decision making. You need a balance between those two. You know, without resources, you can't do anything. So you have to be aware of what your budgetary restraints are to accomplish your goals. But in order to be a good leader, you got to take certain risks and maybe put some resources out there that you might not have, but the return on investment is going to be huge. And that's very important in leadership. Okay? So look at things like leader-member exchange, evaluation and application, and on a reflection note, when you're done with all of that, after you get through the chapter and all the stuff I give you, then try to answer the following questions after you do your second participative discussion, which I think you will really like. The first thing you want to do is answer the question, what are the similarities and differences between the trait and behavior approaches to leadership? You should be able to do that. The second learning outcome is, what are the major assumptions of the contingency approach to leadership? And the third is, define the leadership and situation factors and get into Fiedler a little bit. Look into the contingency model. What are some of the predictions of the model? Like what characteristics are we looking at? Leadership style, task relationship, police preferred coworker scale. So anyway, that's kind of more than an overview. It's almost a lecture on Chapter 3. Good luck with it. And I hope you have fun on tomorrow's third day. Thank you.